we go. Kind of like bring my emotions back down. Good evening. Maseches Yevamos, daf Nun Vav. We are starting 2 lines from the top on Nun Vav. We're going to go to the Mishnah toward the bottom of Nun Vav Amud Beis, and then we'll pick up from there tomorrow. I think today is the 850th blot of Shas. I believe it's either today or tomorrow. I can't remember which one. But I marked off in my calendar. Here's what I marked off. Every time we reach like a 5 or 0 in percentages, 25, 30, 35, 40. And every time we hit a 50 or 100 mark, I have these marks in my little booklet. So these are, we're in between 30 and 35. Baruch Hashem. Making headway. We're almost there. We'll either have no hair or more gray hair by the time we get there, depending on who you are.
Too late.
Well, there's a breaking point where you can't have more gray hair. So, okay. Also true. Says the Gemara, quoting our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had said, "Echad hame'ara ve'echad hagomer kana," that in regards to the different possibilities within Tashmish Amita, that whether or not it was me'ara, which we discussed, is either neshika or it's knisas ha'atara, one of those 2 forms of Tashmish, that is an equivalent to echad hagomer, one who has complete Tashmish Amita. But is it true everywhere? Like, how do we understand this line in the Mishnah? Is it a sweeping comment or is it a limited comment? That is a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. What's that?
Is that just being over?
We'll see. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the Mishnah is speaking about Yibum, but yeah. If you look back in the Mishnah, wherever it is, what we were discussing, it's Habal Yavimto Ben B'Shogeg Ben Memezis. We're talking about Yibum, but we'll see applicability across the boards. So first of all, when is this rule of that Me'ara is similar to Gemar Bia? When is that the case that they're the same? My Kana, what does it mean that you're Kone? So Rav Amar Kana Lako. He says it's across the boards, it's everything. Even ha'ara, even just a minor version of Tashmish Amita, but there is some type of Tashmish Amita, that's enough for it to be a sweeping type of kinyan. And Rashi adds, even for Truma. That's going to be important in a moment. Ushmuel Amar no. Lo kana elo l'dvarim ha'amurim b'parsha. The only time that ha'ara, that this minimal, what Rashi refers to as grua, that it's bia grua, it's not considered a full bia. It's just a bia grua. It's a weaker version of bia. When does he say that is kona? It's only for things that are listed in Chumash about this parsha. Lirash ben nichse achiv, in regards to being a yoresh for his brother who passed away, because he's the yavam for his brother's finances. Ulapocha min hayibum, and the tashmish amita between the yavam and the yavama, that would then exempt the tzara, the second wife, the co-wife, would exempt her from any obligations of chalitza. So even ha'ara would be sufficient. Okay. So now there's 2 ways to understand the scope and the parameters of this machlokes. Here's version number 1. What are we saying about the first husband? Min hanisuin. That first husband that had died and left her as a yavama, they were fully married, not just be'arusa, but they were also benisuin. And if in fact she was benisuin, that she was fully married to the previous husband, the divrei hakol achla, everyone agrees that even after he dies, that she is able to eat truma. Deha havas ka'achla me'ikara. Because before she became a Yevama, when she was married to Reuven, the family is Reuven Cohen, right? They're all Kohanim. So Reuven is a Cohen. So she was eating Truma with husband number 1. So when he dies and now she falls by Yibum to Shimon, she can still eat Truma. So that's what the Gemara says, that if they were fully married, everyone agrees that she is able to eat Truma because she was able to eat it before. Kipligi, when is there a Machlokas Rav and Shmuel? That's min ha'erusin. Only if in her original marriage to Reuven, that Rachel, who's married to Reuven, that they were only be'erusin. Normally be'erusin, she does not yet have rights to the truma. So here's the machlokas. Rav Amar Ochelas. Rav says that she still gets to eat the truma even if they're only engaged. Why? Deha Rabbi Rachman of bias shogeg kemezid. Because as our Mishnah indicates, bias shogeg is kemezid. Any form of tashmish amita is going to count, even ha'ara and even bias shogeg. Bias shogeg is just a sweeping term for the types of tashmish amita that weren't even intended. So here for sure with ha'ara it was intended. That's shitas Rav, is that if Reuven, they were only engaged, she's still allowed to eat the truma. Ushmuel Amar no. Ki Rabbi Rachmana. When do we say that ha'ara is going to be an inclusionary type of tashmish amita? That's the ukme b'makom baal. That's just a din in regards to yibum. But there is no extension of ha'ara, which does generate a yavama and a yavam into a couple. But there's nothing, it doesn't apply anywhere else. Le'ulme mi baal. But to make the second husband stronger than the baal, in that with Shimon, she's able to eat truma, but with her original husband, she's not. That's not possible. So this is their machlokas. Again, this is version 1 of the machlokas. This version 1 of understanding Rav and Shmuel. And version 1 is the machlokas Rav and Shmuel is in regards to a case where when she was married to her first husband, when Rachel was married to Reuven, they were only be'arusa. And Shmuel, who holds that there's a more limited version of the efficacy of this Tashma Shamita, the Shmuel Lataime. What does Shmuel hold that this is Lashitaso? The Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Kol Shehaba'al Ma'achil. Anything where the initial husband would be able to give her food, Yavam Ma'achil. The Chol She'ein Haba'al Ma'achil, Yavam Eino Ma'achil. So that's what the Gemara says, is that if he says that it has to be the same, there can't be a case scenario where the second husband has more power in his relationship with his wife than the original husband. So what the Gemara is saying in the name of Shmuel is like this: if Reuven is married to Rachel, if Reuven is able in his marriage, either because they're engaged or married, whichever the case may be, if Reuven's able to give his wife the ability to eat truma, then Shimon can do the same. But if Reuven can't give his wife the ability to do truma, then Shimon could never be more powerful. Says the Gemara, that's absolutely not correct. And there's an explicit brisa that is against Shmuel. We're a quarter of the way down on Nun Vav Amud Aleph. Meisve, what does the brisa say that's very difficult for Shmuel? Bas Yisrael pikachas, you have a Bas Yisrael who has all of her mental faculties in place. She's a normal person. Shenis Arsa, she was halachically engaged, lekohen pikeach, to a kohen who also had his wits to him. Below hispik lekonsa, they were not successful in getting to the second stage of marriage, the actual nisuin, ad shenis charesh, until unfortunately her husband, the kohen, was no longer mentally fit. He was now a cheresh. He's not a bardas anymore. Says the Gemara, what's the halach in regards to the truma? If all that happened between the two of them was erusin, then eina ochelas. Then the brisa says a crazy thing. Mace, if he died, v'nafla lifnei yavam chadash, and then if Reuven the Kohen died after erusin to Rachel, and then Rachel fell b'yibum to Shimon, ochelas, she's allowed to eat. So that's very much against Shmuel. Because Shmuel, what? Oh, sorry. Didn't even notice I said that. Meis v'nafla lifnei yavam cheresh, then ochelas. Thank you for the correction. That if in fact Reuven died and then she fell to Shimon b'yibum and he is now a cheresh, then ochelas, then the halacha is that she is allowed to eat. And then the brisa says explicitly what Shmuel should dislike. Ubezu yafe koach yavam mikoach ha'baal. Now we have a case scenario where the second husband is more powerful than the first. But that breaks the rule that we said about Shmuel. Shmuel's line is about halfway up from where we are. But also Shmuel Taimeh, what he said, that whatever husband one can do, husband two can do. But it can't be that the second husband, the new brother, is more powerful than the first. So Bishlam of the Rav Nicha, this isn't even a question according to Rav. This is beautiful according to Rav. Elo the Shmuel Kasha. But according to Shmuel, we do see a case scenario where Shimon is more powerful than Reuven. We see that in a case where Shimon is a cheresh, that he is able to allow his wife to actually eat truma, even if he's a cheresh. So Amar Lach Shmuel, about a third of the way down, he says, don't worry. You misunderstood the brisa, or more accurately, there are some words missing from the brisa. Let's relearn the brisa according to Shmuel's lens. V'lo hispik lakonsa. So we have this case as it started above, it was similar. V'lo hispik lakonsa. This woman who was about to marry this Kohen, they were about to get married. They're already engaged. Ad shenis charesh, until Reuven became nischaresh, she became a cheresh. So the halacha is eno ochel b'truma. And unlike the brisa above, which skips to the words mace, here we add in a little bit. But kanas that if in fact they did get married, and only after they got married, he became a cheresh, she's still allowed to eat. And then in that case, this is where we apply the rule, meis v'nafla lifnei yavam cheresh ochelas. So therefore, this brisa worked out kaftor v'ferach according to Shmuel when you change the case. The way the brisa was presented originally was absolutely a problem for Shmuel, but he added in a case over here that he didn't die when you were in a state of, when he was in a state of health. He died when they were already fully halachically married.
What's the finish with that?
Well, my bezu, says the Gemara, then what does it mean to say that the second brother is more powerful than the first? Because if you change the case, then there's nothing mechudash about the second bracha at all. That's Texas question, and answers the Gemara something that we wouldn't have known. De'ilu baal cheresh me'ikara lo ochelas. That had it been that the baal, that her husband was a cheresh me'ikara, that she chose to marry someone who was a cheresh, lo ochelas, ve'ilu yavam cheresh me'ikara, but by yibu me'ikara, that's not achla. They are allowed to eat food, or they are allowed to eat truma. So there's a difference between a regular husband who's a kohen and a yavam. That the yavam, the din is that a yavam can be a cheresh me'ikara and still allow for his wife to eat truma, but it's not true by a regular husband. Who knew that a cheresh is not a bar das? We know people like this in the community. There's a Down syndrome couples who've gotten married to one another. Let's assume they're a cheresh and a kohen for just a moment. Can his wife eat? That'd be enough kamina. Can his wife eat truma? So it depends. If it's for the sake of yibum, it's allowed, and if it's her regular marriage, it's not allowed. Very sensitive din. It's a very it's not it's
How
not.
do we allow someone to marry a cheresh?
What's the problem?
Cheresh is someone who doesn't have his mind, right?
Cheresh is definitely you, but they're not considered to have capacity. Not shota, it's a cheresh.
Right, it's a
Okay.
cheresh, but still, this question stands. How does the kedushin work?
Cheresh is okay, fine.
Why no? How does it? No, I like Gerald's question. How does that work? How do you get married if you're a cheresh?
Oh, you mean because he doesn't have capacity?
Yeah.
That's a great question. You can't, I think
Yeah.
you cannot make kinyanim, which is what.
But others can be makna you. Others can be makna the cheresh. So let's say
Yeah,
the
but-
parents choose to be makna their child, their adult child who's a cheresh, whatever. It's a good question, Gerald. Didn't even cross my mind.
It's a great question.
I was asking a different question with package.
Don't be humble. That was a great question, Gerald. You can have a bagel from this morning now that you skipped the. We got some in the side room. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. All right, all of this is version 1 of how to understand Rav and Shmuel. And here is version 2. Version 1 was that the machlokas was when they were only engaged. And here's version 2. Ika de Amre, halfway down, some say it's a little bit different. Ika de Amre, mino erisin divria kolo achla. Everyone agrees that if the original marriage between Reuven and Rachel was one where only the erisin had taken place, everyone agrees lo achla that she doesn't need the truma. Dehalo achla b'chayibal. She never benefited from it because she was only betrothed to the Kohen. Ki pligi, where is the machlokas of Rav and Shmuel? That's min hanisuin. That's if Reuven and Rivka were in fact fully married. Rav Amar that if they were fully married in the previous marriage, ocheles dehahavas achla me'ikara. Because in her first marriage, she was able to eat the truma because she was fully married to that Kohen, to Reuven. Shmuel Amar ein ocheles, doesn't matter. Even if she was fully married, then when Reuven dies, she loses her rights. Ki Rabbi Rachmana, when does the Torah make this inclusion of the ability to eat truma? That's when there's bias shogeg kimezid ledvarim ha'amurim beparsha about l'kol mililo. He says that it's not like all of a sudden you have permission carte blanche, like you just happen to be married to Reuven, who was a Kohen, and therefore when he dies and you become a Yevamos to Shimon. No, you have to redo the whole relationship, and we'll see soon why that's true. But the Gemara is saying is that there only are specific parameters as to when we say she can eat the truma, even if her first husband was fully married to her. So it says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Amar Rav Nachman, we saw earlier. Remember, whenever you see an Ika de Amre, you're always going to see the same Marim almost flipped on their head. But the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Kol shehaba'al machil yava machil. How can you say that? Shmuel at the top of the page in the first version of this machlokas, Shmuel had said that anything that was true by Reuven would also be true by Shimon. Anything that wasn't true by Reuven wouldn't be true by Shimon. So if that's true, that really we're saying that the machlokas is in a case of nisuin, like the version 2 of the Gemara is saying, then it should be that since Reuven, who was the husband, was able to be machil to give her truma, so Yava machil, the brother Shimon, should also be able to give it to her. So how Shmuel can you say that that's true? So he actually teaches his own line. Ema, it shouldn't say kol shehabal machil, kol bia shehabal machil ba, yava machil ba. It depends on the specific form of tashma shamita. V'chol bia she'ein habal machil ba, ein hayava machil ba. He rewires the brisa to be speaking about something different than what we were talking about, and therefore the question falls away. But here too, we have a question on this, in this case, on both Rav and Shmuel. Meisve, the same Marimakum we said before. Bas Yisrael pikchas shenis arsa lekohen pikeach. You have a woman who has her mental faculties, who is engaged, halachically betrothed to a Kohen who has his mental faculties. Now, they were about to get married, and right before then, unfortunately, he became a cheresh. The halacha is she's only an arusa, ein ochela, she's not allowed to eat the truma. The brisa continues, meis v'nafla lifnei yavam cheresh, that if Reuven dies and Rachel falls to Shimon, who is a cheresh, ochelas. Ubezu, says the Gemara, by virtue of the fact that we see that the cheresh, that Shimon the cheresh is able, through marriage, through tashma shamita, is able to allow Rachel to eat truma. So therefore, bezu yafekach yava mikoach ba. We see from this brisa that there's more power in the shita in the position of the Yavam than there is for that of the original husband. Now, Rav could get out of this with the answer that Shmuel gave above. Bishlam ala Rav, even though this doesn't really seem to agree with Rav, because the Brisa says Eina Ochelas. Rav says that she's allowed to be Ochelas because her previous husband was Ochelas. But here we don't see that. Here, what we see in the Brisa is Eina Ochelas. How does Rav get out of that problem? He retranslates the Brisa like Shmuel did. He says, Bishlam Rav Metaritz Kidataritz Meikar. The answer that we saw above, that the Brisa wasn't talking about Kol Baal, but Kol Bia Shehaba al Ma'achil Ba. So that's how Rav answers it. Ela Shmuel Kasha. And the Gemara says, you're right, Kasha. You're absolutely right. So if we were poskim, if we were Rishonim, we'd look at this Gemara and say version 2 has been rejected. And therefore, it seems to be that version 1 of the Gemara is the appropriate understanding of Rav and Shmuel, and that the machlokes is where Reuven and Rachel were fully married. Where the machlokes is where Reuven and Rachel were only be'erusin, and in that case, Rav says ochelas, and Shmuel says, nope, it really depends on what we're talking about, that then only applies by Yibum, but not elsewhere. And that brings us to the 2 dots, 3/4 of the way down on Nun Vav Amud Aleph. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanim, Bas Yisrael Pikchas Shenis Arsa L'Kohen Pikech. We're going to analyze this case yet again. Really, we're going to add a little bit to it. That a Bas Yisrael, a Jewish girl, who had all of her wits to her, she was betrothed to a Kohen who also had his wits to him. And he unfortunately became a cheresh before they got married. The halacha, as we've seen many times over, is Eina Ochelas. She's not allowed to eat truma. Very unique din. But if nolad la ben, if they had a child, so then the halacha is Ochelas. Then they're allowed. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi's 5 lines before the wide line, because her son is the son of a Kohen, and the son of a Kohen is allowed to eat. And therefore, and the language of Ya'achilu is he makes her into one who can eat. So if the son can eat because the son's father is a Kohen, then the son's mother can eat because the son can eat. So that's what the Gemara says back inside. We're 5 lines in the Gemara, 5 lines before the wide lines. No la ben ochelas meis haben. What if the son dies? So he was her portal of entry to truma, because the only reason she was allowed is because she had a child. What happens if Rahman al-Islam, the child, has meis haben? Says the Gemara, that's a machlokes tanaim. Reb Nasan omer ochelas, no problem, he can eat it. V'chachamim omrim eina ochelas. And the chachamim say that if the child dies, she loses her ability to eat the truma. My time at Reb Nasan. So the Gemara seems to think that Reb Nasan is a bigger chiddush that she's allowed to eat. Why does Reb Nasan say ochelas? Says the Gemara, Omar Rabba hoel shekvar achla. She's already been privy to having truma. So once she's able to eat the truma, so it seems to be that he's arguing, Reb Nasan is saying that because she once had access to eating truma, therefore, even though that which allowed her to eat truma is no longer in place, her child, which was her portal of entry to truma, even though he's no longer here, says the Gemara, that is an unacceptable answer. If that's true, then Bas Yisrael Shenises LaKohen. Let's say that a Jewish girl marries a Kohen, she's allowed to eat truma, but then umis le techel shekvar achla. Would we say that if he died that she's still allowed to eat? It's meant to be read rhetorically, not in a flat tone like I just read it. He died on her techul shekvar achla. Would we argue that this woman who's a Yisrael, who used to be married to a Kohen, but he died, she's allowed to eat? That's not correct. Ella, what do we say? Kevan de misle pakale kedushte mina. That once the Kohen dies, the wife no longer has access to it. So hachanami here too. When the son dies, kevan de misle, because her son died, paka kedushte mina, she should no longer be allowed to eat. So the Gemara is questioning the shita of Reb Nasan. Reb Nasan wanted to say that because she was initially allowed to eat truma, so even though her son died, they should still be allowed. So how then do we understand Reb Nasan? So at the end of the very first long line, Ela Amar of Yosef, Kasavar of Nasan, that it has nothing to do with the son. Nesue cheresh ma'achilin b'truma. He says, just categorically, somebody who marries a cheresh, they're allowed to eat truma. We're not concerned about nisue cheresh as it relates to kiddushe cheresh. We're not concerned about anything at all in regards to this, and she is allowed to eat this food simply because they're married. Says the Gemara, if you're saying that the reason she's allowed to eat the truma is because they're married, then why did you bring in the case of nolad la ben? The Brisa said that the reason why she's allowed to eat is because of her child. And then the Gemara says that's impossible. It can't be that Reb Nasan meant that. The Gemara says, you're right. She's allowed to eat that because they're actually married. Says the Gemara, but you just gave me 2 lines in a Brisa about her son being her portal of entry. Says the Gemara, Amar le Abaye, 4 lines from the bottom, Ihachi, that she's allowed to eat the truma because she's married to the cheresh. No lad la ben lamali. Why was the Mishnah talking about a case of a ben? The ben is irrelevant. So says the Gemara, Mishum Rabbanon. The reason why the case was mentioned was in order for us to articulate the sheet of the Rabbanon. Says the Gemara, if that's true, the liflog Rabbi Nasan alayhu bereisha, then we should have seen Rabbi Nasan argue earlier on in the Brisa. What did the Brisa say? It's no lad lab. If we look back up at the Brisa 5 lines up, there would have been an opportunity for him to argue a little bit earlier. It says no lad lab ben ocheles. Right there, it should have said that Rabbi Nasan argues, but it didn't. Says the Gemara, yeah, shavik lahu l'rabbanan ad misaymei milsayhu v'hadar palig alayu. Rabbi Nasan was patient. He was waiting until everybody spoke, and then he rejected everything by saying, I disagree with all of you. Says the Gemara, if that's true, then things should have been in a different order. Ihachi, listening, what should the Mishnah have written? The Brisa should have said, Meis haben eino ochelas, the sheet of the Chachamim first, and then Reb Nasan Omer ochelas. If Reb Nasan is going to show up every sheet of the Chachamim in the Brisa, put him at the end so he could be the Makeh Patish and argue on the whole entire thing. So says the Gemara, Kasha, that's a very good question. And therefore, we really don't seem to have a clear answer about the Shita of Reb Nasan, about whether or not if a son dies, the mother who is a non-Kohen is allowed to still eat Truma. Unclear from the Gemara. Our Mishnah had said a couple of blot ago, and as we're at the very bottom of Menvav and Aleph, our Mishnah had said at the beginning of the Perek, V'chein haba al achas mikol ha'arayos, it would also be true about all of the other arayos. Let's see what this is talking about. Amar Rav Amram, Ha Milsa Amar Lan Rav Sheshes. There's something that Rav Sheshes taught us, and the Mishnah that we have over here verifies what Rav Sheshes said. And he brightened our eyes with our Mishnah, which is a colorful way of saying that he brought a beautiful raya. Rashi says at the top of the page, he brightened our eyes. He saw something in our Mishnah. First, let's see what Rav Sheshes said. Top line. Eishes Yisrael shene'ensa. Rahman al-Itzlan. A woman is violated, a woman who's a Yisrael. Afal pishim muteres lebaila. Even though it's true that if, God forbid, that a woman is violated, she's raped, even though she's still allowed to be with her husband, in the event that she ever divorced or her husband died, psula lekahuna. She's a zona as it relates to kahuna, and a Kohen cannot marry a zona, even though she didn't want it, and even though it wasn't her interest, but still, she's going to be psula.
If she was married to a Kohen.
We're going to discuss that in about a minute. If she was married to a Kohen, it's a very big problem. So says the Gemara, V'tana tuna, then what does our Mishnah teach? V'chein haba al achas mikol ha'arav samuras b'torah, o psulos. So says the Gemara, when it says in our Mishnah, V'chein, what's the V'chein? My V'chein. My lab, doesn't it mean to teach us loshna b'shogeg, loshna b'mezi, loshna b'ones, loshna b'ratzon? That as it relates to a Kohen, it doesn't matter how she was violated, even if it was b'ones, he is not allowed to be with a woman who has been ne'enas, who's been violated. The katani pasla, we still see that the halacha is that it's possible. Says the Gemara, that's not the correct understanding. Lo, when it says v'chein, it doesn't mean any tash b'shamita. My v'chein. What does it mean when it says v'chein? It means ahara. It means that if there's even only a partial tash b'shamita, that's going to be considered making her into a zona as it relates to a Kohen. So says the Gemara, ha'ara deman. Wait a second. Is the ha'ara talking about a Kohen? What is the ha'ara talking about? The Gemara says, if you're trying to say that what we're learning out from here is that ha'ara is problematic as it relates to arayos, as it relates to this relationship that shouldn't be with this woman, the violation, the memra de arayos yalfina and miyavama. Are you trying to tell me that after all of this Masechta, you're saying that Yevamos, which is like the biggest Chiddush mitzvah in the world, that we learn from Yevamos to Arayos about ha'ara? No way. Adarabba. Yevamos yalfinan me Arayos. We should be learning Yevamos from the world of Arayos to Ikar ha'ara be'Arayos ksiv. So how could you make an applicability, an extension of ha'ara to other areas of halacha out of Yevamos? Our Mishnah says halacha by Yevamos about ha'ara, v'chein by Arayos. Says the Gemara, come on, Yibum is the biggest chiddush in the world. You can't learn out a chiddush. You can't learn from the case of a chiddush. So therefore, elamai v'chein. Therefore, what does it mean v'chein? Ashalo kedarka de arayos. What we're learning from Yibum to the world of arayos is about a din of shalo kedarka. That if she was nena shalo kedarka, that would still make her a zona. Says the Gemara, adarabba. Again, same problem. Ikra mishkeve isha be'arayos ksiv. These are dinim that apply by women. You can't be learning them out from Yibum, which is a chiddush case. Elamai v'chein, says the Gemara, what then are we talking about? Ashelo kedarka dechayve lavin, a unique din, a din that the Gemara says is ashalo kedarka, talking about tashma shemita shalo kedarka, but only speaking about chayve lavet, because the cases by our rayos were by and large cases of chayve krisa. So we needed to learn the din of shalo kedarka, that even if it wasn't a case of our rayos, that the bia shalo kedarka would cause her to be a zona. And now we're going to discuss one of the most certainly emotionally sensitive, difficult halachos, that if a woman who's married to a Kohen is violated, that her husband is not allowed to live with her anymore. So says the Gemara, Amar Rava, a third of the way down on Nun Vav Amud Beis. Eishes Kohen Shenenza, God forbid 1,000 times over. Eishes Kohen Shenenza, Baila Loke Aleha Mishum Zona. If the husband is with her again, he gets malkos for being with her, out the din of znus. So the Gemara says, wait a second. It's only Mishum Znus, Mishum Zona in, Mishum Tumalo. There also should be Tuma. So says the Gemara, you're right. Ema af Mishum Zona. You're right. It's two issues. That if a husband is with his wife, if a Kohen is with his wife who was violated, she now has the halachic status of a Zona. And the din is that not only does she have the halachic din of a Zona, she's also Tmeya, or she'll make him Tameh. So, I don't know the answer to that question. Shouldn't be mamzerus.
No, why would it be a mamzer? It was a nenos. It wasn't something that she wanted to do.
Well, I thought if she went back to the Kohen afterwards.
Right, no, if she went back to the Kohen, are they Kohanim or are they halal?
I didn't see anything about a halal, but I don't know the answer to your question. Don't know. Good question. And says the Gemara, a third of the way down, let's ask on this. Masiv Rav Zera, Vihi lonis pasa asura. Quoting the pasuk, the Brisa says she was not forced. If she's not forced, then she's asura, hadnis pasa. But if she was grabbed and she was forced into tashma shemita muteres, that's talking about an eshes Yisrael. The Brisa continues, v'yesh lecha acheres. There's another woman, she'afal pishin is pasa asura. Even though she was violated, it was against her will. She's still going to be asura to her husband. Ve'ezo, who is that? Says the Gemara, zo eshes Kohen. And the Gemara uses this as a question. You said above that you wanted to give him malkos, that he's violating an Isur Doraisa. But really, that's not the way the pasuk is learned. The pasuk says, Vihi lo nispasa. She was not violated. She was not forced. She chose. So what we learned from there is that a woman who is a Yisrael who was violated is muteres to her husband. And we inferred from there that a Kohen's wife would be a zona. So says the Gemara, we're really learning it from a place where the Torah speaks in a positive frame, where they're able to stay married if it wasn't on purpose. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabba, you've got it all backwards. Hakol hayu bichlal zona. Really, any woman who is violated would be begeder zona. However, kishapar lecha kasav gabe eshes Yisrael hilo nispasa asura. That when the Torah went out of its way to speak about an eshes Yisrael, that when it was not forced, she's asura, but hanispasa muteres. But had it been that she was forced, then she'd be mutter to her husband. Michlal the eshes kohen kedekaima kaima. The Chiddush is on the Yisrael. The Chiddush is not on the Kohen. The Kohen is exactly like we normally would have thought. In other words, the status quo of a violation of a woman is that she's a zona. The exception to the rules of Yisrael. So therefore, of course, it should be the case that an Eishes Kohen is, in a case of, God forbid, a woman is violated and she's an Eishes Kohen, that it should ruin their marriage. Of course, that's true. The Chiddush is that by Yisrael it doesn't. So again, we're looking from a different perspective. And that was all version 1 of the din of Rava. And here's version 2 of the din of Rava. This will bring us to the Mishnah, and then we'll stop. V'ika de Amre, Amar Rabba, Eishes Kohen shenensa. If the wife of a Kohen was violated, Baila loke alav mishum tuma. In the previous version, it said zona first. So here she's going to be violated because of tuma. So asks the Gemara, mishum tuma in, mishum zona lo. There's only one problem with the Kohen being with his wife after she's been violated, and that's tuma. It should also be znos. So says the Gemara, Alma be'ones lo kari bezona. It seems to be that if there's an ones, it's not going to be considered znus. Did I skip a line here? No. 1 second. Eshes konchinensa baila lokala mishum tuma in mishum zona lo. If that's true, then alma be'ones, right? Be'ones lo karina be'zona. So says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Masi Rav Zera v'hi lo nispasa asura, hanispasa muteres. That by an Eshes Yisrael, that if she wasn't forced and she was intimate with someone intentionally, then she's a zona and she's asura to her husband. Hanispasa muteres. But if she was forced, then the Eshes Yisrael can still be with her husband. So here too we see the brisa, like we saw earlier, that by a Kohen it should be problematic. So how could you say above that line of Alma that maybe that she's not a zona? Of course they are. So says the Gemara, Amar Rava, the same answer as before. Hakol hayu bichlal acharei asher hu tamea. Really, everyone was in the category of tuma. Everyone, any woman who has tashma shemita who's going to be violated really should be tmeya. And asura. And when the Torah went out of its way to speak about an Eshes Yisrael, that if she was not forced to be with a man and she was, then that's asura. And he nispasa, but had she been forced muteris mechlal, the Eshes Kohen kidakaima kaima. That really the Eshes Kohen is going to be tmeya. So the difference between these two approaches halachically, it seems to be nothing. The question is just how we look at the primary isser of the Eshes Kohen to her husband. Is it going to be just that if he's with her, it's that there's an isser of znus, or is it also an isser of tuma? Which one is the primary? Which one is the secondary? But the halachos appear to be the same. Mirza Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up with a fresh mission on the bottom of the Yevamos. Wishing you all a beautiful night.